Hi everyone. So I'm just recording a short video today. I just want to talk about this channel, American Intelligence Media. And I came across them a few weeks ago. And basically they're talking about the Radhanite Jewish banking cartels from Babylon. Now, this all sounds well and good that somebody else is exposing the banking cartels and these fake imposters of the Hebrew people and faith that I have been talking about for almost a year now on my channel. However, I think that these people may be twisting this narrative. I think these people might be trying to take control of this narrative. And, I don't want to sound arrogant, but they've come along after my channel has been up with the information I've been putting out about who the Jews really are and who these banking cartel are. They fail to mention the Herods or the Herodian sect. And what's got me concerned is that they are mixing this information with Gnosticism. I don't want to sound arrogant that perhaps these people have taken my information and are now running with it in their own narrative. But I don't see many people out there on YouTube or any platform really talking about this that much. And, we know that these people are fake Hebrews, but the fact about the banking cartels, the Radhanites, the Silk Road trading routes, I found that to be kind of unique to myself and only a few more channels. And, I think that this guy here has admitted that he's associated with Jesuits. And I'll just play a bit of their videos and just show you exactly how they're mixing Gnosticism.
So go ahead, Douglas.
The Radhanites invented the social credit system. The way they did it is they took a religion, Hebrewism, which said they cannot have any temple and that they can only have the 10 Commandments. And they twisted it up so bad that they built 2 temples, now they've built a third one that is a secret temple, and which I have the inside track on to know that it is in fact already built. But really, what were they doing? They were taking what was a belief and turning it into a system of control through economics, through laws that the common person had to follow, but the elite didn't, and the elite were in control of whether or not they could, first off, be considered a true Hebrew, which you had to, once a year, go and make sacrifices at the temple with money that had to be changed. So when Christ, at his time, was entering the temple, he was not only saying that the money changers were wrong, he was saying the temple itself shouldn't exist. He's saying that the belief in having a king like Solomon or David, no, the Old Testament said to do the absolute opposite of that. So what we really have is that Jesus was not what you would call a Jew or a Hebrew at that time, because he was an Essene. He was born in Nazareth. If you look it up, you'll find there never was a city named Nazareth. Nazareth was the name of a closed Essene community that was a walled community that you couldn't even enter unless you were an Essene. And that's the reason why his followers carried a knife, kind of like a sword, always with them, because they were to defend themselves from those evil ones that were claiming to be the high priests or claiming to be Jews or Hebrews who had returned from Babylon. Complete and absolute nonsense. The Old Testament tells us that all Levites, the priestly caste from the tribe of Levi, were in fact completely eradicated. So how was it that they were able to continue their practices according to the Talmud and according to what the disinformation tells us in Babylon, when in fact, after they started up again with their practices after the first exile in Babylon, then they came back and the Babylonians saw that they were starting up this nonsense again. So they made sure that they stopped all religious practice, and the only people left in Israel were humble farmers that were farming the land for the Babylonians. So in essence, in Jesus's time, There were no Hebrews left.
So already here he's creating a deception, not to mention all the previous things he's just said, but that there were no Hebrews left in Judea at the time of Jesus. Now, this contradicts the Bible. The Bible tells us that there were 12,000 taken out of each tribe, the remnant left of Israel. So there were most definitely Hebrews left at that time. And Jesus himself was a Hebrew, not an Essene. So he's now just declaring that Jesus is not of the descendant of King David, or that he is not a descendant of Abraham. After that time, Jerusalem was destroyed, and we have two destructions of Jerusalem. We have the first at the time of the Romans and the second at the time of the Crusades. So this guy is trying to deceive and say that there were no Hebrews left. And then later on, he goes to say that Hebrews were not even Hebrews and that it was all just one big banking lie right from the beginning.
And so it is a complete myth. But what is true is that we can follow the Old Testament, and it says that they could never, ever follow the 10 Commandments. They couldn't follow any commandment that God ever gave them through their prophets. But one thing that they did follow is what is now already in place today, and it's the proof of what I'm saying. There have been multiple messiahs, the Sabbateans and others. Different people came and said they were the Messiah. Well, what does the Old Testament say the Messiah will do? He will come, he will touch his toe on Mount Zion, and he will then take over the whole world for the Hebrew faith. Well, that did happen. He did come, he did touch Mount Zion, and the Radhanites did take over the whole world through hegemony, through their plan of hegemony, world control through a manipulation of supposed sacred acts that were conducted by their Levite priests. But not one single Levite priest ever returned to Israel, and they were completely extinguished while they were in Babylon. And
so I'm just going to stop it there and just say how wrong this guy is mixing information about the fake Hebrews with this information saying that they took over the whole world. Well, I'm sorry, what are you're so confused with what you're saying. One minute you're saying that there were no Levi priests left, they couldn't obey the words of God. One minute you're talking about Jesus getting rid of these people, you're calling him an Essene. This man is mixing truth with lies. And then you're saying that the Messiah prophecy is for the Radhanite fake Hebrews to take over the whole world. No, I'm sorry. The thing that took over the whole world was the message of Jesus Christ. And Jesus was the Messiah who touched his toe, not some fake Hebrew Messiah. These people aren't to be trusted.
their new practices that arose out of the Talmud were simply a mix of Radhanite, Babylonian, and ancient Hebrew beliefs. But again, when the Sabbateans were and other messiahs were funded by the Rothschilds and even Weishaupt with his Illuminati, these groups were basically supported by Radhanites you can't get a bigger Radhanite Babylonian cartel member than the Rothschild family. And they supported all of these fake messiahs because the fake messiahs were antinomialists, which means that they believed in doing the opposite of what the Ten Commandments say so that the Messiah would come, because the Messiah will only come in the greatest moment of the abomination of desolation, which is described specifically in relationship to the Hebrew temple and the sacrifices. And the abomination is basically the continuation of blood sacrifices. So we have now literally fake Jews, Babylonian Radhanite cartel members, who do have us all in debt slave in the Western world, at least. And what are they doing? Following the 7 deadly sins, which are basically the counterpoint to the 10 Commandments.
So just let's this man, Gabriel, tell us who he is from his own words and listen to his Gnostic teachings.
we're starting to be moving into deep waters, as we say, as we start to get closer towards Dr. Gabriel's principal task in this world, which is to bring to light the work of Rudolf Steiner to the English-speaking world. Douglas, how are you?
I'm very good, John. Very good. Thank you so much for asking. You know, I just noticed that somebody said, "Oh, you mentioned Guru Das. I had dinner at my house with Guru Das in Barcelona, Spain. He's a wonderful person." Remember, I never met him. He was the only other really accurate paid psychic in those days. And so we would often be called for things. And the flower essences, which I couldn't remember the name of, they would send us all these things in blank bottles, you know, just a number on it, and we'd take it and then write down what we said. We always agreed. So when it comes down to it, what I'm going to talk about today is a little bit dicey, but the reality is that a psychic knows a psychic, and a saint knows a saint. That's why I don't know any saints, because I'm not a saint. I can't tell you if somebody's a saint. I'm certainly not a saint, but I am born clairvoyant, and I can tell instantaneously when I meet someone. Someone asks, "How do you know?" Well, it's inexplicable, but basically you realize that you can communicate with them without speaking. And it's instantaneous. And every great Tibetan teacher I ever met instantaneously recognized me the second I walked in the room, and then literally would call me up and make me sit on the dais. You know this, you've seen this. So anyway, that's a Vogel crystal. So, and Guru Das did help with Marcel Vogel's research. This is another one, a little bit bigger. These things cost a fortune. Okay.
So already he's talking about great Tibetan teachers that recognize him. I mean, he's preaching Christianity and Christ, and yet he's going to Tibetan teachers and mystics. He preaches Anthroposophy, that's hard to pronounce, is a spiritualist movement founded in the early 20th century by the esoteric Rudolf Steiner that postulates the existence of an objective, intellectually comprehensible spiritual world accessible to human experience. Followers of Anthroposophy aim to engage in spiritual discovery through a mode of thought independent of sensory experience. While much of Anthroposophy is pseudoscientific, proponents claim to present their ideas in a manner that is verifiable by rational discourse, and say that they seek precision and clarity comparable to that obtained by scientists investigating the physical world. Now, it has its roots in German idealism, mystical philosophies, and pseudoscience, including racist pseudoscience. Now, Rudolf Steiner, he's an Austrian occultist. He's famous for the Steiner schools and education system. A social reformer, architect, esoteric, and claimed to be clairvoyant. Did he have the revolutionary Jewish spirit? So it doesn't tell us on Wikipedia, of course, but, you know, we've got to ask the question, what nationality was Rudolf Steiner? And, you know, here we have online, what nationality is the name Steiner? So it says that it's German and Jewish Ashkenazi. Occupational name for someone who worked with stone, a quarryman, stonecutter, a stonemason, an agent derivative of Stein. So, you know, it might not be Jewish, but there's a high likelihood that it is a Jewish surname, given that Jews love to have some kind of stone name in their surname, like Sharon Stone. A lot of Jews with the surname Stein. So according to this article in The Independent, the big question, who was Rudolf Steiner and what were his revolutionary teaching ideas? It says here, after the First World War, Steiner was denounced as a traitor to Germany for suggesting Upper Silesia should be granted independence, and the political theorists of the new National Socialist movement, or the Nazi Party, claimed mistakenly that he was a Jew. Was it really mistakenly? I'm not sure about this. He was a victim of a personal attack by Adolf Hitler, who called on other nationalist extremists to declare war against Steiner. His health began to suffer and he died soon afterwards. So it seems to be wiped off the internet whether Rudolf Steiner was actually a Jew or not. But here we have another famous Steiner, George Steiner, who was a Franco-American literary critic essayist, philosopher, novelist, and educator who wrote extensively about the relationship between language, literature, and society and the impact of the Holocaust. And he was born in 1929 in Paris to Viennese Jewish parents. So, is this guilty by association just because this person, Steiner, is Jewish, that Rudolf Steiner is Jewish? Well, I don't know. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, then there's a good chance it's a duck. Now, we have Prince Charles and the royal family who are big fans of Rudolf Steiner and his education system.
Ladies and gentlemen, I was delighted to have been asked to contribute a few thoughts at the opening of your meeting organized by the Associazione per l'Agricoltura Biodinamica on the theme of our common planetary home. Now, it seems ever more clear that the way in which we manage farmland in the future will be of central importance to ensuring the future ecological health of our planet. Economic growth alongside unsustainable population growth is today one of the most powerful drivers behind a range of disturbing ecological trends that include deforestation, climate change, depletion of natural resources, and the mass extinction of animals and plants with which we share our planet and on which we depend ultimately for our survival. As the economy has gathered more and more global momentum, so these trends have become increasingly serious. For a long time, the prevailing view was that environmental damage from growth in the economy was an unavoidable price that had to be paid to improve human well-being and reduce poverty. In order to favor one, we had to ignore or tolerate damage to the other, to cannibalize ecology for economic gain, or so the thinking went. Now, I suspect that many people have always known deep in their hearts that this view was wrong. And now, as more and more evidence emerges of the damage that we have been doing to the natural systems that support every aspect of our existence, it is clear that we must urgently change this deeply embedded and dangerous thinking. Achieving a secure and prosperous future for humankind requires us to accept that healthy economies depend on healthy ecology and to behave accordingly. In other words, we have to allow proper room for nature, to rediscover how to work in harmony with her, and to restore a sense of the sacred once again. Otherwise, we seem hell-bent on testing our world to destruction, simply because we have become the prisoners of the kind of scientific evidence-based reductionism that precludes the adoption of a precautionary approach. If the planet were a patient, no responsible doctor would ever have allowed it to become as sick as we have made it. Yet, for more than half a century, industrial farming methods based on chemistry instead of biology have prevailed, upsetting the harmonious balance of nature, degrading soils, decimating the biodiversity which once coexisted with food production, and diminishing the health and vitality of the food we eat. Now, ironically, we are witnessing a sudden growing concern around the world about soil health and fertility. The response to this, however, seems inevitably to be based on the usual industrial technological approach. Of course, Rudolf Steiner was one of the first people to recognize the interconnectedness of soil fertility and the vital health of plants, animals, and people. He also understood the concept of ecosystems, arguing that, and here I quote, "a thoroughly healthy farm should be able to produce within itself all that it needs." Sadly, his visionary advice was not heeded, as a result of which intensive farming has prevailed and has been responsible for the destruction of much of the world's natural capital, including our forests, soils, and the diversity of animals, plants, and insects, which used to coexist with farming.
Now, this all sounds lovely and fair, but, I believe it's the 1% class that pushed for this chemical technocracy in the first place and pushed us out of working on farms and into industrialization to get rich. And now they're turning around and blaming us for the problem that they created. So when we look into Rudolf Steiner a little bit more, we have it here. It says that in 1919, a man named Rudolf Steiner was tasked with building an educational facility at the Waldorf Astoria Cigarette Company in Stuttgart, Germany. At the time, Emil Molt was the managing director of the company, and quite simply, the school came to be purely because the employees had children that needed an education. Molt followed a spiritual belief called Anthroposophy. Rudolf Steiner, coincidentally, is the founder of the Anthroposophy movement. The reason many people don't quite understand what the Waldorf education system has to offer is that in the 1920s, suggesting to teach children about karma, meditation, and art as therapy was absolute lunacy. So the Waldorf Astoria Zigarettenfabrik, I can't pronounce that, it's German really, but was a German tobacco company established in Hamburg in Stuttgart by Emil Molt and several other partners on January the 1st, 1906. It was named after Johann Jacob Astor, born in 1763 in Waldorf, in present-day Baden-Württemberg, who after emigrating to the United States became the richest man in said country. Now, why would they name it after him? The company proved successful and employed around 1,000 people in 1919. However, it experienced difficulties in the second half of the 1920s due to outdated production methods and global economic situation, and competing trusts took over a large portion of the shares. In 1929, the company was liquidated. The Waldorf Astor tobacco brand, with the portrait of John Jacob Astor, Waldorf Astoria became famous for giving its name to Waldorf education. John Jacob Astor was a German-American businessman, real estate mogul. He's famous for the Waldorf Astor Hotel in New York. Now, they tell us that he was German, but according to this by author Fritz Springmeier, the original founder of the Astor fortune was John Jacob Astor in 1763-1884. John Jacob Astor was born in Waldorf, Duchy of Baden, Germany, from a Jewish bloodline. The Jewish origins have been hidden, and quite a number of various ideas of the Astor heritage have been put into circulation by the Astors. I won't go on, but it's claiming that the Astor bloodline is Jewish. In 1919, Steiner's student, Emil Molt, who managed a cigarette factory in Stuttgart, asked Steiner to develop a curriculum for a school for the children of his employees. Because the factory was called the Waldorf Astoria, this became known as the Waldorf School, the first in a global network that today includes about 1,000 elementary or high schools, 2,000 kindergartens, and hundreds of special education programs. Now, I find this really interesting that this whole school system is named after these New York aristocracy, possibly Jewish family, the Astor family, and the Waldorf Astoria. It goes on to say that about his doctrines and beliefs, Steiner's teachings on many of these topics mirrored those of the Theosophical Society, especially the writings of Madame Blavatsky and Annie Besant. Steiner acknowledged these parallels, but insisted that he did not teach anything publicly unless he had confirmed it through his own spiritual research. So Rudolf Steiner and the Theosophical Society. The relationship between Rudolf Steiner and the Theosophical Society, co-founded in 1875 by H.P. Blavatsky with Henry Steele Olcott and others, was a complex and changing one. Rudolf Steiner founded the Anthroposophical Society in 28th of December 1912, and he was expelled from the Theosophical Society on March 1913. So we see here that he was actually part of the Theosophical Society. In 1899, Steiner published an article in the magazine für Literatur entitled Goethe's Secret Revolution on the esoteric nature of Goethe's fairy tale, The Green Snake and the Beautiful Lily. This article led to an invitation by the Count and Countess Brockdorf to speak to a gathering of theosophists on the subject of Friedrich Nietzsche. This invitation was followed by a second, the occasion of what he later considered to be his first fully esoteric lecture, once again on the topic of Goethe's fairy tale. Steiner continued speaking regularly to the members of the Theosophical Society, becoming the head of its newly constituted German section in 1902. The German section of the Theosophical Society grew rapidly under Steiner's leadership as he lectured throughout much of Europe on his spiritual science. Through his lectures to theosophists, Steiner met Marie von Sievers, owner of the Theosophical headquarters in Berlin, who was to become his spiritual partner and second wife. From the end of 1903, Steiner and von Sievers became the inseparable center of Berlin Theosophy. By 1904, Steiner was appointed by Annie Besant to be leader of an esoteric school for Germany and Austria. Steiner made it clear that this school would teach a Western spiritual path harmonious with, but differing fundamentally in approach from other theosophical paths. These and other differences with Besant became particularly pronounced at the Theosophical Congress in Munich in 1907, organized by Steiner. His focus on artistic expression was a sharp departure from Blavatsky's tradition. Now we know that Madame Blavatsky was Jewish. Annie Besant nee Wood was a British socialist, theosophist, Freemason, women's rights activist, educationist, writer, orator, political party member, and philanthropist. So was she British? I don't know. Maybe she's into Freemasonry, so maybe she was indoctrinated to this Kabbalistic belief through Freemasonry. Thereafter, she became involved with union actions, including Bloody Sunday demonstration and the London Match Girl strike of 1888. She was a leading speaker to both the Fabian Society, Marxist Social Democratic Federation. She was also elected to the London School Board for Tower Hamlets, topping the poll, even though few women were qualified to vote at that time. So in 1890, Besant met Helena Blavatsky, and over the next few years, her interest in theosophy grew, whilst her interest in secular matters waned. She became a member of the Theosophical Society and a prominent lecturer on the subject. Okay, so she probably was a Jew. Annie Wood was born on the 1st of October 1847 in London into the upper middle class family. She was the daughter of William Burton and Percy Wood. William Burton. We know that there's plenty of Jews with the name Burton. Tim Burton, for example. Okay, so I see. She was the daughter of William Burton, Percy Wood, 1816 to 1852, and Emily Roche Morris, died in 1874. Now, we've learned previously in other videos that the surname Morris is a Belgian Jewish name. The Woods originated from Devon, and her great-uncle was the Whig politician Sir Matthew Wood, 1st Baronet, from whom derives the Page Wood Baronets. Now we know that Kanye West posted this image on Twitter, I believe, just recently. It's a Star of David or a Star of Solomon, Seal of Solomon, with the swastika in the middle of it. And, you know, if we go back to the symbol of theosophy, it's very similar to this. We have the swastika at the top with the Seal of Solomon. In the center is the Ankh, and it is encircled by the Ouroboros snake with the sex symbol of Om at the top. So I think we can safely say that Anthroposophy comes from Theosophy, the religion of Helena Blavatsky. Rudolf Steiner was a Theosophist, and the Waldorf Steiner school is one based on the occult teaching of Theosophy. So I need to ask why this person here, Douglas Gabriel, is preaching Anthroposophy, and why is he using this message that I've been teaching in my videos about the origin of the merchants and the fake Hebrews, mixing it with lies. And I'll just show you why I think he's doing it. And I think it's because these people, like the communists have always worked at grassroots movements, placing their agents in where revolution starts and trying to spin it to their own agenda.
This was the kind of stuff that the Catholic Church thought I was useful for. That, and then they said, study Steiner. We want you to study Steiner. So my mission was to go out in the world as what they call a Jesuit associate, and I call it a Jesuit spy. But I thought in my heart of hearts that there was a lot of things that I'd read in Anthroposophy that could be helpful to the Catholic Church, including parochial schools. They could use Waldorf methods, including their Christology. They could actually really begin to understand the Bible and understand Christ if they studied Rudolf Steiner. So I made a promise before I left University of Michigan, St. Louis University, that I would do this. So my first mission was go to the local place, the kind of the center of Anthroposophy in Spring Valley, New York, and live there until I'd read all the books from the library and met the people. And my mission for me was to meet anybody who had met Rudolf Steiner personally. And so that's what I was doing. So that's that transition from really, I continued to be a Jesuit for, quite some time, years, but I didn't check in with them. I wrote my report eventually and told them, yes, Waldorf education is tremendous. Biodynamics is tremendous. His Christology is tremendous. And so I gave them a report. And then years later, when the Jesuit head of the Jesuits got deposed before he died, he was sick and he was replaced. Many of us knew that was the end of us. We couldn't continue to do our very spurious work as associates, or as I like to call them, Jesuit spies. And so
So we have Douglas Gabriel here, just admitting that he was a Jesuit and that he was set up by the Jesuits to go and learn everything about Rudolf Steiner. So when we go back to the video where they're preaching about Radhanite Jews, so we have this woman here who, looks like some kind of priest in her black and white top. And, I'm not accusing her of being that. She's from You Are Free TV. But, there's something a little bit strange about the image of these people here. This guy here, who's the all-American cowboy, and the Theosophist Jesuit.
quite right, Free, and I like the way that you put that. In fact, the Hebrew people, I have nothing against the Hebrew people, even though some people say that there are no Hebrews, there never were any Hebrews. And if you look at the haplogroups, the only thing you can identify are people who are from the Levant, period. They could be Amorites, they could be Canaanites, they could be Chaldean, Assyrian, Babylonian, whatever. But when it comes down to what was told about the ancient Hebrews, and by the way, the word Jew, you will find only used from about the 5th century AD on, according to the propaganda. Complete nonsense. The Babylonians were calling them Jews in 600 BC and even before. And so what you really have here is the Hebrew people have basically been annihilated, and banksters using fractional banking, which is pure and absolute evil because it's a different law for the bankers than it is for the rest of us. The bankers can go bankrupt. The bankers can have bad deals go down. And what happens to them? Absolutely nothing. Still to this very day. Banks are immune practically from prosecution. And the people who took Goyim blood in them, pagan blood, European blood in them, than they have any Hebrew blood in them. And if you look at the haplogroup indications, you really cannot prove that anybody is a true Hebrew. You can get down to the specific haplogroup that ruled the Levant. Well, that went to Ethiopia. It went to Turkey. It went to Armenia. It went all over the place. But what it for sure didn't do is the stories that we're told. For instance, the Talmud, they say, was created in the 5th century AD. 100% incorrect. It was created 600 BC. And so the Talmud was nothing more than a complete rewriting of the Hebrew faith. So if somebody arises out of Ashkenazism, out of being Sephardic or any of the other types of Jews, and they're using either the Zohar or they're using the Talmud, that's not Hebrew. That has nothing to do with the religion. Those are man-made rules, made-up stories, mythologies, literally fairy tales in the Zohar and in other works that they use to control the narrative. And it is basically propaganda. And even if you take the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, look closely. They're 100% plagiarisms from the Chaldeans, the Chaldean book of Number, the Chaldean book of Genesis, directly taken. So Moses didn't write those books. And remember, Moses was a Chaldean. He married Deborah, the daughter of Jethro, who was a Chaldean. And so when it comes down to it, you can't really name a time that the Hebrews, including Abraham, who was really a Babylonian Chaldean, who'd claimed all the land from Babylon to the Mediterranean as his. Well, what gave him the right to do so? Once again, it was an invasion. They also invented the pogrom, they invented Holocaust, and they invented what we now know as debt slavery through the Hammurabi Code. So the Hebrews did not follow the 10 commandments that were in Babylon. They followed the Hammurabi Code. They were not Jews. They were not even Hebrews. And so what we're finding now is every single time you hear a statement about ancient Jews or modern Jews, you can guarantee that it is a lie.
So what he's claiming here is that ancient Hebrew information is a Chaldean lie or Chaldean lie. That all of the Hebrew information is some kind of banking cartel story. Now, if this is true, then it's true. But why is he speaking doublespeak like a Jesuit? 1 minute he's professing Jesus, the 1 minute he's professing God, but then he's saying everything about the Bible and the patriarchs, the prophets, is some big banking lie from Babylon. He's speaking with a serpent tongue. Gabriel, genealogy, discussing about the origin and meaning of Jewish surnames, finding relatives in Argentina. The vast majority of Argentine Jews are descended from immigrants who arrived from Europe. These Ashkenazic Jews migrated from small towns or detels of Poland, Lithuania, Russia, Germany, Romania, or Ukraine, leaving behind most of their Jewish relatives. So this is an open forum to discuss the origin, the meaning of the family stories of the surname Gabriel. Now, is it a possibility that this guy is one of these Ashkenazi Jews? He's admitted that he's a Jesuit. We know the Jesuits are run by the Jews. They are the Jewish militant arm of the Roman Catholic Church. You know, I just want to know why these people are using the information about Radhanite Jews, about banking merchant cartels that I've been speaking about and twisting it to add all these lies and confuse people with the information. Number 2, they do not mention the Edomite angle of this or the Herodian angle, the aristocracy and the Herodians marrying into Roman aristocracy, becoming the aristocracy of Europe, who ruled over the people of Europe, who are the lost 10 tribes. And he says here that we can't tell the origin of the Hebrew people. That's true. No, we can't, but we can trace where they went to. And no, the European people are not Goyim. They are the lost tribes of Israel. I've been going to do a separate video on this, but I'm going to add a little bit here about the dragon. And in my message, we have in Revelation the dragon, which runs the people of Gog Magog. Now, in my videos, I've identified Gog Magog as the Ashkenazi people. They are descendants of the sons of Japheth. The dragon in the Bible refers to 3 groups of people. It refers to the Pharaoh of Egypt, it refers to the king of Babylon, and it refers to the king of Judea, King Herod. If we have a look at this here, Tannin, Tannin Hebrew, Tananu, was a sea monster in Canaanite and Hebrew mythology, used as a symbol of chaos and evil. This is pretty interesting. We have this image here of this Tannin. It's a 7-headed dragon. So in the Bible, it says that there were 7 nations of Canaan. We know next to nothing of the earliest inhabitants of the land of Canaan. There were Rephaim, a race of giants, the Anakim, or sons of Anak, also giants, long-necked ones, and Avim, or Avites, dwellers in ruins, who lost their land to Philistines. The descendants of Noah's grandson Canaan took possession of the land except for Philistia. Canaan himself had 11 sons, and each bore a tribe. 6 of them dwelt in Syria and Phoenicia, and the remaining 5 in Canaan. The Lord mentioned 7 nations by the name who inhabited the land of Canaan in the time of Abraham unto the time of Joshua: Canaanites, Amorites, Hittites, Jebusites, Hivites, Perizzites, and Girgashites. Under the leadership of Joshua, the Israelites were to conquer the land of Canaan and utterly destroy the inhabitants. Deuteronomy 7, 1-2, when the Lord your God brings you into the land where you got to possess it, cast out many nations before you: the Hittite, the Girgashite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite. 7 nations greater and mightier than you. And when the Lord your God delivers them up before you, and you strike them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them. The religion, like the nations that surrounded them, were idolatrous. They made their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire of Moloch, and they worshipped Baal and Ashtaroth, which included temple prostitution. God swore that the Israelites would possess this land, and that if they had not done it, the land would vomit them out because their sins were complete and reached up to heaven. Tannin appears in the Baal cycle as one of the servants of Yam, defeated by Baal or bound by his sister Anat. He is usually depicted as serpentine, possibly with a double tail. Tanninim also appears in the Hebrew Bible's book of Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Psalms, Job, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and Jeremiah. They are explicitly listed among the creatures created by God on the 5th day of Genesis. The Tannin is listed in the Apocalypse of Isaiah as among the sea beasts to be slain by Yahweh on that day, translated in the King James Version as the dragon. So the dragon is Canaanite. Canaanite religion was a group of ancient Semitic religions practiced by Canaanites living in the ancient Levant from at least the early Bronze Age. Ezekiel 29, verse 3, "Speak and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, the great dragon that lieth in the midst of his rivers, which hath said, My river is mine own, and I have made it for myself." According to the Bible, the ancient Egyptians were descended from Ham through the line of Mizraim. Ham had 4 sons: Cush, Mizraim, Put, and Canaan. So the Egyptians were from Ham, just as the Canaanites were from Ham. They were descendants of the line of Ham. And I've done other information on Ham, the wickedness of Ham, seeing his father's nakedness, the curse of Canaan, who may have been the result of that nakedness. Jeremiah 51, verse 34, "Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon hath devoured me. He hath crushed me. He hath made me an empty vessel. He hath swallowed me up like a dragon. He hath filled his belly with my delicates. He hath cast me out." So the descendants of Ham, he wrote, "And Cush fathered Nimrod, and he began to be a mighty one in the earth. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, and so it said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord." Many commentators claim that Nimrod means "we shall rebel," foreshadowing the events in Babel. Some scholars associate him with Babylon's patron deity Marduk, or with Ninurta, the god of war and hunting. However, this genealogy affirms Nimrod's humanity, therefore several other options are worth exploring. So Marduk was a Babylonian god. In Mesopotamian religion, the chief god of the city of Babylon and the national god of Babylonia. As such, he was eventually called simply Bel or Lord. Originally, he seems to have been god of thunderstorms. A poem known as Enuma Elish and dating from the reign of Nebuchadnezzar I relates Marduk's rise to preeminence that he was the god of 50 names. So Marduk's star was Jupiter, and his sacred animals were horse, dogs, and especially the so-called dragon with forked tongue, representations of which adorn the city walls. On the oldest monuments, Marduk is represented holding a triangular spade or hoe, interpreted as an emblem of fertility and vegetation. So the Sumerians were Shemites, located immediately after the global flood. Latest research suggests that they inhabited the land of Sumer before eventually being displaced by descendants of Ham. Scholars have wondered why the Sumerians are not mentioned in the Bible anywhere, with the exception of the land of Shinar, referred to in Genesis, as well a few other verses and prophecies. So what it's telling us is that in Sumeria was inhabited by the descendants of Shem, and they were pushed up by the descendants of Ham. We know that Nimrod was a descendant of Ham. A book on Bible studies here, biblicalstudies.org UK, relation between Canaan and Babylonia in the Hammurabi epoch. According to the fragments of Berosus, a Babylonian priest who wrote the history of Babylonia down to the death of Alexander in 323-22 BC, the Babylonian chronologists placed the beginning of their authentic history at 2232 BC. The fragment of Porphyros preserved in Simplicus places the beginning of the first historic dynasty at 1903 years before the first year of the reign of Alexander in 330 BC. This results in the same date, 2233. Evidently, then there was a general consensus of opinion among the Babylonians as to the date of the so-called First Semitic or Hammurabi dynasty. We have now other chronological data from which this date, and as we possess the date list for all the 11 kings of the first dynasty, their separate reigns can be correctly fixed. Hammurabi sixth king of this dynasty reigned for 2130 to 2088. He is generally agreed to be the Amraphel of Genesis, in whose reign the kings of Elam and Lasa made war upon Canaan in the days of Abraham. We are therefore for the first time in Old Testament tradition upon apparently safe historical ground, and in the question arises, can the characters mentioned in Genesis 14 be further identified, and if so, what political and religious influence surrounded the father of the Hebrews in Canaan? In regards to the second aspect of the problem, I intend to discuss only such influences as many have been exercised by Babylonia on the West, or such conceptions as may have been carried from Babylonia to the West. So basically what they're saying is there's a Canaanite force in Babylonia and there's a Semitic force in Babylonia. So we know that Babylonia had already seen the rise and fall of several Sumerian and Semitic dynasties before the Hammurabi period. In fact, the dynastic list of Ur and Isin exists, carrying us back several centuries before the so-called First Dynasty. A Semitic dynasty existed at least 1,000 years before Hammurabi and these early Semites. Now, what's the first letter of this word? Ham. Hammurabi. Do you think he might be a descendant of Ham? So these early Semites, or first invading wave of Semites, came apparently from Arabia or Canaan. So the Neo-Babylonians, which was the kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar, were known as Chaldeans. Babylon was reborn under the Neo-Babylonians 792 to 595, who defeated the Assyrians and established a large empire. The empire reached its peak in the 6th century BC under Nebuchadnezzar, the famous biblical ruler. The Neo-Babylonians are also known by their biblical name, the Chaldeans. Sometimes their state is called the Second Babylonian Empire. Abraham's Chaldean origins and the Chaldee language. So according to this rabbi, Don't know if we should trust him, but he says that Abraham was born in Sumerian Ur. In painting a picture of Abraham's background, the most biblical commenters assume that Abraham was born in Ur and that his family later migrated northwards to Haran. The Bible, Genesis, refers to the place of Abraham's birth as Ur Kasdim, literally Ur of the Chaldeans. Academia generally identifies this city with the Sumerian city of Ur, although others have suggested different sites. According to this version of narrative, Abraham's family escaped Ur and relocated to Aram in order to flee from the influence of Nimrod. The reason for their escape is recorded by tradition. Nimrod's civilization, biggest sponsor of idolatry, sentenced Abraham to death by fiery furnace for his iconoclastic stance against idolatry after Abraham miraculously emerged unscathed. This is from the Talmud. This story, from the Inferno, his father Terah decided to relocate the family to Ur, within Nimrod's domain, to the city of Haran in the Aram region, which was relatively free from Nimrod's reign of terror. Now we know that Nimrod was a descendant of Ham. There's two factions going on in Samaria at this time. So this person, Narmanides, offers a slightly different picture of Abraham's origin and bases himself upon the series of assumptions which we shall call into question. He begins by rejecting the consensus view that Abraham was born in Ur Kasdim by reasoning that it is illogical that Abraham was born there in the land of the Chaldeans because he descended from Semites, yet Chaldea is the entire region of Sumer, Hamitic lands. He supports this reasoning by noting that the Bible refers to Abraham as a Hebrew, not a Chaldean. So, some people say that the Chaldeans were Semitic. We know that they were Hamite lands. He further proves this point from a verse in Joshua which states, "Your forefathers always dwelt beyond the river, even Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor." The word always in the context implies that Abraham's family originated in the beyond the river region even before Terah. Similarly, he notes that the next verse there states, and I took your forefather Abraham from beyond the river and led him throughout all the land of Canaan," which also implies that Abraham is originally from a region known as beyond the river. For a reason we shall discuss below, Narmanides assumes that the term beyond the river favors the explanation that Abraham was originally from Haran, not Ur Kasdim. So the Chaldeans were not necessarily Semites. They were from Canaanite lands, and Babylon came out of Canaanite people. So we have 3 stories of the dragon. We have King Nebuchadnezzar being referred to as the dragon, the king of Babylon. We have the Pharaoh being referred to as the dragon, the king of Egypt, who was a descendant of Ham. All of these nations were descendants of Ham. So in Malachi 1, verse 3, it says, and I hated Esau and laid his mountains and his heritage waste for the dragons of the wilderness. Now, who are the dragons of the wilderness? I believe that the dragons of the wilderness are the Canaanites. So Esau's heritage was laid waste. Jacob inherited the promise to Abraham by God, where Esau inherited wastelands and dragons of the wilderness. So in Genesis 28:9, it says, this concludes the thought begun the previous verse. Esau seems to have become newly aware that his marriage to 2 Canaanite wives displeased Isaac. Either Isaac had never communicated this to Esau before, or after he married the Hittite woman, Esau had rebelled against his parents' wishes in marrying women from a tribe in the land of Canaan. So now Esau, who is a descendant of Shem, has married into and mixed his genetics with the Canaanites, who are the cursed children of Ham. So his inheritance is laid waste to the Canaanite dragons of the wilderness. So when we get to Revelation 12, and it says here, and there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon its heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and he cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered to devour her child as soon as it was born. So we know that the child is Jesus. We know that the mother is Mary. And who was to devour Jesus? It was King Herod the Edomite or Idumean. He was a descendant of Esau. He was a descendant of Canaan. He was a Canaanite, a descendant of Ham. He was a dragon of the wilderness. And we see that the Canaanite dragon god has 7 heads. So this dragon has 7 heads. It has 10 horns or powers within that Canaanite region. And 7 crowns. I've spoke about that in another video. So every single dragon that's spoken of in the Bible is a descendant of the line of Ham. Was Ham the ancient serpent, Leviathan, that came out of the flood, out of the waters? Quite possibly. The dragon's been depicted with Nimrod. The dragon has been depicted down through all the Canaanite and descendants of Ham empires through time. We then have the word Canaan translated in the Strong's translation, a territory, Canaan, and sons of Ham. Further down, the Strong's exhaustive concordance, Canaan, means merchant, traffic. From Cana, humiliated. Canaan, a son of Ham, also the country inhabited by him. Canaan, merchant, traffic. So, who are the dragon bankers today? The merchants and the traffickers of human misery. The bankers of London and their symbol, the dragon, who rule the people of Gog Magog, the Ashkenazi Scythian people, to attack the camp of the saints. Revelation 20. And then 1,000 years were expired. Satan shall be loosed out of his prison and go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, the number of whom is the sand of the sea. Now this guy, Gabriel, before was saying that the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, has allowed the Radhanite people to go out into the whole earth. This is true, but what he's talking about is a lie. This is what really happened. They shall go out to deceive the nations which are in the 4 quarters of the earth, Gog and Magog, the Ashkenazi Scythians, and gather them to battle, the number whom is the sand of the sea. And they went upon the breadth of the earth and compassed the camp of the saints. That's us, the beloved city, because we are the New Jerusalem. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil that deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast, the false prophet, are, and shall be tormented day and night forever and ever. Don't believe these people. I think they're using history and they're twisting it. They're twisting the truth because they're scared. I think that this information is important. It's important for all humanity, and it's important for Christians. And these Jesuits are trying to impersonate, again, because that's what these Ashkenazis do. That's what they always did on the Silk Road trade, is they impersonated people, they murdered people, and they stole their identities. And this is exactly what they've done to the Hebrew people, is they've killed them off, or trying to kill them off. They're trying to kill us off now, the lost tribes, God's people, Jacob's people, and they're trying to kill us and steal our identity. but they won't do it. They don't have a hope of doing it. And, you know, if God wants this information out, he will get it out there despite them trying to hide it amongst lies. Thanks for listening, everyone, and see you next time.